Lecture 2 for week 5, module 3, the playwright's job, dramatic structure. This lecture is all about elements of causal plot structure. All right, let's start again by defining some terms. When we're talking about action in a play, we're talking about something that happens, an event, something physical, something that's happening. And of course, most plays are made up of a series of actions. Now, there are lots of ways that we can organize that action, if you remember from our bucket of beads analogy from the last lecture. One of the simplest ways is to organize it linearly. Linear action is when there's several events happening in chronological order. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. That's a pretty coherent way to tell a story. It provides clarity. It can be a little suspenseful and compelling, and that's how most of us tell stories. But what Aristotle said really needs to make a good play is causal action, which it's linear, meaning it's in chronological order, but where each event or each action causes the next one to occur. So take special note of this spelling here. It's causal, right? Same root of cause, as in cause and effect, not casual. I like to think of causal plot structure as like a string of dominoes. You flick the first one and the rest will fall down one after the other. Event A causes event B to happen. Event B then causes event C, and on and on and on and on and on till the very end of the play. You can see that in that little video I had you watch, the fortune telling machine, right? Where you can see that one flick of the card hitting that ping pong ball sets events in motion. And once that first action happens, it causes the next action, the next action, the next action, the next action, and the next action until finally you get to read your fortune. So as I said, Greek playwrights used this structural causal plot structure, and Aristotle, in writing about it, kind of codified how to do it. And many playwrights, especially in Europe and America, still use it today. It's not the only structure, and we'll get to more alternative structures later on, but for today, this is what we're focused on. So to lay out the spine, as it were, of a causally structured plot, we need to have these 6 elements: point of attack, stasis, inciting incident, rising action, climax, and dénouement or falling action. And if the action of a play were to be plotted on a graph, this is what it would look like. That first dot over there on the lower left is the point of attack. We have some stasis, then we have a new dot inciting incident, followed by a very jagged, upwardly climbing line of rising action. You'll see the highest point is that dot marking the climax. Then we have a sharp downturn, which is the dénouement or falling action, finished with a parallel line called the new stasis. So let's unpack the first point on our graph, the point of attack. So I like to think of this as the first story bead on our plot necklace. The point of attack is always the first moment of action in the play. When the curtain comes up, or if there's no curtain and the lights come up and there's somebody on stage and they're doing something, that's the point of attack. This is the point where the story, where the plot begins, right? Because you kind of imagine these characters are off in their universe, living their lives, and we are kind of joining the action as if we were a fly on the wall, observing them at a particular point in their life. A lot of stuff has gone on before. Perhaps a lot of stuff will go on after the action of the play is over, but this is the point where we are joining them in their story. The next piece is stasis. Now you can see I've got 2 orange lines, one at the left-hand lower side and one at the upper right-hand side. And as you can see, they're fairly flat. So stasis, right, if you've taken chemistry, you might have heard this term before, right? Stasis is when things are stable or inert, or there is a lack of change. So when we're referring to stasis in terms of a causally structured plot, we're talking about moments in the play where there is no conflict. So the points in time where we're most likely to find stasis are at the opening few minutes of the play and the ending few minutes. And the reason why is because we need to have the audience understand what, quote, normal looks like in this world. We need to understand, where are we, who's in charge, what's going on, what's happening. And once we get a kind of a lay of the land, then the plot starts to take off. And then at the end of the play, after the conflict has been resolved, we reach a quote new normal that may be very different from what happened before. But it's going to be where we leave the characters, and they're in a relative position of stability compared to the conflict that has just happened. So old stasis and new stasis.
Another thing that happens in the old stasis is we tend to receive a lot of exposition. If you remember from our reading, the exposition is background material. This is where sometimes we'll get a lot of those quote known knowns, right? Or the given circumstances in a text. We might not get all of those details. A good player will kind of sprinkle them in throughout the plot and let drop certain pieces of information at different moments. But we do need enough information to understand, where are we, who are these people, what's their relationship to each other, and all of that. We really need to get a lay of the land. And we do that through this exposition. And that typically happens in this old stasis moment.
Our third piece is the inciting incident. It's that single dot after that flat line right before things start to take a sharp uptick. So unpacking the verbiage, right? To incite means to cause something to happen. An incident is an event. So the inciting incident is an event that makes something happen. And what it does in plays is that it makes us, the audience, and perhaps also the characters, aware of the conflict. This is the moment when normal kind of takes a turn and things become very unstable, right? Everything is hunky-dory until ... this thing happens. So after we get the lay of the land, we have this inciting incident, and then we start to become aware, oh, this is what the conflict is going to be. Oh, this is what the protagonist's, major dramatic question is going to be, what their objective is going to be. And so that MDQ gets revealed, the conflict gets revealed, and now our interest in this play is really kind of perked, and we're going to be more fully engaged because now we're starting to understand what the stakes are, and seeing who the opposing forces are, and we're starting to get invested in like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Up next is rising action, which you can see is the bulk of the space on this chart. And it has peaks and valleys and is in a general upward climb. So the rising action is basically the whole part of the play where the protagonist is trying to answer that major dramatic question and trying to achieve their super objective by way of conquering some smaller objectives. And so kind of each point on this graph is, either a smaller objective achieved or a smaller objective failed where they have to try something else, okay? So the protagonist either fails or they level up repeatedly throughout this rising action, always in pursuit of their super objective. So as you can see, this is going to take up the bulk of a play's action. And it keeps going upward because each time, just like in a video game, each time you achieve an objective, it gets a little harder. And so the dramatic tension kind of increases at each step. So if you think back to our discussions of, objective, obstacle, and tactics, right? This is that series of beats in a play. And there may be just a few beats or a few small obstacles, or there may be dozens. It just kind of depends. Step 5, the climax. As you can see, it is again 1 point on the graph. It is at a very high point, and it is almost at the end. Okay, so the climax is the moment when the major dramatic question is answered. It is the moment of action when the conflict is resolved. And so this is why it happens very near the end of the play. When we reach the climax, the tension has reached its, tightest, highest peak, and then suddenly is released, right? Everything kind of comes to a head. Maybe it explodes, right? Use your own metaphor here. But everything we've been working towards, it all comes down to this. It's like that clock ticking down to the final seconds, and then boom, everything gets resolved in one way or another. And our sixth element, or sixth ingredient, if you will, is the dénouement. It's the downward trend after the climax. You can also think of the dénouement as the falling action. You can go ahead and use those terms interchangeably. The word dénouement is a French word. It means literally to untie. But in America, we kind of talk about wrapping up the loose ends, right? So metaphorically, they sound very different, but we're talking about the same thing. The denouement is, how a play ends, where we're starting to get a sense of what the new normal is going to look like. It's what's the fallout from the climax? What is the result of resolving the conflict? What is new normal going to look like? So tension continues to drop through this, right? Things are starting to kind of settle down, and we're starting to understand what new normal looks like. And as you can see, this takes a relatively short period of time, and then we reach that flat line, which is we're establishing what the new stasis is going to be, and we're going to end the play. So you can see we start at a point of low tension, we get a little bit of background information, get introduced to the characters and their situation, then something rather unsettling happens that kind of knocks everybody off their game. And then we are treated to a series of rising action. It finally gets resolved in this high tension climax. We then have the falling action where we start to see the results of that resolution. And then we have a new stasis. I sometimes like to think of the plot structure as the inciting incident as this moment where somebody kind of like picks up a snow globe and shakes it. And so everything is kind of at loose ends and all over the place. We really don't know what's going to happen. And so it's almost like characters are kind of experiencing a little earthquake. And so they kind of fight their way through that. And then finally they reach the end and everything is settled down. They may not have come down in the same place or in the same relationship to each other, but things have settled. And so our interest gets piqued when the inciting incident happens, and then our interest wanes after the climax. And then the characters may go on to live the rest of their lives, but think like, this is at the point in the fairy tale where it says, and they lived happily ever after. So we're a little bit less interested in what happens to them after that point because happily ever after is kind of static and, while lovely, perhaps a little boring. So our interest really wanes at this point, and we bid the characters and their world goodbye.